Characteristics of the flood. Covered some of this last week. A global flood is really unique, and people get it wrong. One of the biggest areas that people get wrong is they think that it would be just like one big mixing bowl, and everything would be mixed so much that it would be just the same all over the earth. Turns out that a global flood is drastically different from place to place. It was over 15 cubits over the highest mountain. That tells us that it wasn't a local flood. Some people try to, say, well, it says global, it says over the whole earth, but it doesn't really mean it. It's a moral tale, and so it doesn't really mean it, and it was just a local flood. But if it was 15 cubits over the highest mountain, that spreads out, and it will never hit 15 cubits until you have the whole area covered. Although the geography would be different. There wouldn't be a Mount Everest necessarily. We have no idea how tall the tallest mountain is before the flood.
Could there have been a Mount Everest?
There could have been.
Do we find fossils on Mount Everest?
Yes. We find sea fossils on top of Mount Everest. At the peak of Mount Everest, they found sea fossils.
So that I always attribute that to the flood.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that the top was at 30,000 feet. It could have been lower and then pushed up in the upheaval of the flood.
Okay.
Because we have the weight of all that water drastically changes everything. And the flood, of course, left massive evidence. Now, we look at it, or I look at it, and I see massive evidence. Other people look at it and they try to explain the same things in other ways. And, I look at the Grand Canyon, and I see an amazing evidence of a global flood covering a huge area with huge amounts of dirt, and not deposited over millions of years, but deposited sideways all at once. And we went into that last week, but it's massive evidence all over the earth. And I think that's a better scientific explanation than a series of floods that would cause each layer.
So are there other places where, like our Grand Canyon, what we call the Grand Canyon?
Sure.
Are like over in Europe or in other
Hawaii?
Yeah, there are fossil and non-fossil. There are what's called sedimentary rock formations all over the world.
Oh, okay.
Now, almost nowhere in the world there is the entire geologic column. The geologic column is this construct from one to another according to ages. And what you find is actually what you'd expect to see in a flood. You find a few over here, you find a few over here, you find a few over here. And you find different ecosystems in different parts of the world. And that's what you'd expect to find. So you find huge variations over the world, and that's what we're expected. Also, in the global flood, we're told that water was released not just from above, but from below as well. The springs, the deep. So some people say, well, 40 days of rain isn't enough to cover the earth. Well, that's right, because we're told that there was water from below as well. And this was not just rain as we think of rain. This was a piercing of the water canopy and, huge, amazing, huge amounts of water. We have three groups of people relative to the flood. We have those who perished in the flood, by far the biggest group. We have those who were preserved through the flood, Noah and his family. Those are, 8 people. And then we have a fascinating one, those who were removed before the flood, Enoch. And so there are those of us that would see Enoch as a type of the church being raptured before the flood. Enoch was raptured before his father died. His father died on the year of the flood. So that's always a good Bible quiz question. If Enoch, if Methuselah was the oldest guy, then how can his son be older than him? But Enoch never died yet, so. All right, so now the ark. This is the last part of 6. We've got this giant thing. It's a lot bigger than we tend to think of it as, equivalent to about 1,000 train cars. 450 feet long, 75 feet tall, roughly. Depending on whether you use the Egyptian cubit or this cubit or that. It goes from 15 to 21 inches. It's somewhere in there. It's designed for incredible stability on the high seas. It turns out that a 1-to-6 ratio is ideal. That's the right ratio for stability in high sea weather, and that's what they use in modern warships, for example. That same ratio, because it's the right one. It's the one that stabilizes in the waves. God got it right. Didn't need to have 2 of every critter. Only 2 of every kind of critter. So people say, how could it hold all the different variations? And you go, only had to have 2 dogs. It had to have 2 of every kind that you then have bounded variations. It didn't have to have a Chihuahua and a Great Dane and a Lab. It only had to have 2 dogs. And then from there within the allowed variation of DNA, then that can produce the other ones. But DNA has repair mechanisms, so it keeps it bounded into a kind.
Do we have a sense of time at how long it took to build the flood? To build the ark?
Mm-hmm. And we'll be getting to that.
Okay.
We do indeed.
Sorry.
No, nothing to be sorry about.
Glad you asked that.
It's an interesting question because you get people that say very dogmatically, this is how long it takes. And I take a different view. Also, the critters could come aboard as juveniles. Babies. You didn't say that you had to have a full-grown T-Rex. You could have had a couple of little tiny ones. Now, before the flood, given the water canopy, it's likely the atmospheric pressure was twice as high as is now. You'd see larger plants. You'd see larger, the ability for larger animals to succeed with their lungs, their lung capacity, and things like that. After the flood, it would become a very hostile area. And so you'd see things like the T-Rex dying out.
And then if I'm going to be
Yeah.
Okay, but animals like amphibians and fish, there was no need to put them on the ark.
Right.
Because they would have been able to.
They had aquariums.
They had, yeah.
And God would have, because of the variation.
Accommodate for a lot of creatures.
Yeah, because of the variation in the waters, he wasn't told to bring the sea life
Right.
in. And because of the variations in the floodwaters, there would have been crazy busy water, and there would be areas of relative stillness
Right.
where they could do just fine. And the other thing is it's not clear that he had to feed them while they were on the voyage. They very well could have been in suspended animation. We know of lots of animals that hibernate, and it would be very easy. God brought these animals to the ark. It would be very easy to say, okay, now go to sleep. Noah was told to bring food for him and his family, but it's interesting. You don't see him being told to bring food for the animals. So. How long to build the ark? That's a great question.
What's amazing is how you were able to put that slide in after Vicki asked.
I know, wasn't that cool? You didn't even see me typing madly here. Okay, so we have that funny verse in verse 3 of 6. The Lord says, my spirit will not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, there's different ways that people look at that. Some people would say, okay, that means that he's going to live to a maximum of around 120 years old. The other way of looking at it is saying that from when God said that, it was going to be 120 years to the ark, till the flood, which would give a maximum amount of time of about 120 years to build the ark. However, we have Noah. He had 3 sons. He had Japheth when he was 500 years old, 100 years before the flood. 2 years later, he had Shem. Sometime after that, he had Ham. We're not sure by how much. Figure 2 years, likely. They would need time for them to grow up and marry to help him in building the ark. So God specifically told Noah to build an ark that would be used for himself, his wife, his sons and their wives, and the animals. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that he already had those sons. It could have been a prophetic, or God knew that he would have sons. So sometime between when Noah was 500 years old and when Noah was 600 years old, 600 years old is when the flood started. So sometime in that span, God told him, and it doesn't say what year exactly God told him to build the ark, but I'm sure he started right away. So it could be as little as about 55 years if this is after the sons and everything else, or as much as 120 years. It could be anywhere in that span of time. I mean, it was a lot of years. Okay, it wasn't. It also says that Noah and his sons built it. Doesn't mention them hiring anybody else, but it's possible that they could have. It's possible that they could have hired work. I don't know. He got it done, and I'm glad. The biggest application for us is considering the will of God. Noah was completely obedient to the call and the will of God. Here was God asking him to do something out in left field. They hadn't seen rain. They had probably lakes and seas and things, but they, had no idea. He knew what a boat was, but he had not seen rain. He had no idea of what a flood would look like in that way. But when God asks us to do something, he will always supply absolutely everything that we need to do it. He'll supply the time, he'll supply the resources. Also, Noah was fully committed, especially when he climbed into the ark, and God shut the door. Now God said, I'm going to shut the door, and then 7 days from now I'm going to have the flood. Can you imagine? There he is. They're settling down. They're getting everything locked down. And so God gave them a week to lock everything in place, I guess, and get stowed away and this and that. And then 7 days later it came. But there you are. You've had this marvelous, amazing miracle of all the animals being brought in. God shut and sealed the door. But you're still there. That'd be an interesting week.
So do you think that the ark is on Mount Ararat? Or is that the right mountain?
It says the mountains of Ararat. And yes, I absolutely do. Whether there's about 4 good candidates, which one is best, I don't know.
For things that have been spotted, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple that sound especially good, but I don't know.
It's crazy in today's world that you can't access everything.
Well, they have been, I was just reading an article about how, they've been people, even recently, within the last 10
Mhm,
to
mhm.
20 years, they've
Yeah.
done satellite pictures. And
Right.
stuff,
Some of it, though, is in hostile, it's in hostile territory. It's in Turkey, and, it's not the most friendly territory for a lot of things and expeditions of this type.
And I never thought of it before, but if since the water covered the whole earth and then the waters subsided, but we have freshwater lakes and salt seas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it could have been that they were all, that the minerals came out as freshwater lake. You usually have a spring of water that is then and has an outflow. That if you don't have an outflow, it becomes stagnant. And you have the Dead Sea, and you have things like that. The minerals collect. So it could have been that they were washed away over
Okay,
time.
Yeah.
But the weight of the water would have, some of the land masses would be pushed up, other things would be dipping down. The whole earth was really in upheaval at that time.
Mm-hmm.
The flood was not a calm period for our geography. Miscellaneous stuff. Noah was told to load 2 of every unclean animal, and 7 of every clean animal, and 7 of every bird. It's not clear why. It could have been that God wanted them to have food to eat and things to use in sacrifices afterwards. It says 7. It could be that the very original text would have said 7 pairs. That would kind of make sense as well. But it says 7, and so that's what I'll go with. How did he know what was clean and unclean? The law was given through Moses. This is that was a while later. He had no idea. Oh, well, no. If he had no extra knowledge, what I would say is from Adam on. Adam was created as a man. Part of a man growing is educating him. Adam would have had perfect education from God. And so I think even by the time of Noah, they would still have preserved a lot that they would have had.
Especially with the length of life, it's like people could help make the stories, make sure
Mhm.
they were correct.
That's right. That's right. 7 days God shut them in. God told them out. Could they have gotten out at that point? I don't know. Probably not. There's probably no way out without opening the door, and cutting through or something. Maybe if they worked hard enough, they could. But it's almost a good example of being saved, choosing to be saved, and then, okay, you're saved, and we're not going to let you be unsaved.
Maybe the ark would have been compromised too.
Yeah. They were in the ark a bit over a year, 371 to 378 days, somewhere in there. Long time. Before the flood, everybody was vegetarians. They did not eat meat before the flood. And, they look and you see God saying, I've given you all the plants to eat. After the floods, barbecue. All the critters, but without the blood. You had to drain out the blood. Because now, the reason given is that the life is in the blood. I think that part of that was God expressing a hint of what was going to come with Jesus, pointing to that and wanting it to be solid. And then another part was protecting people against improperly prepared meats that could cause them diseases. You have the rainbow, the symbol of God's promise to never flood the earth. There was no rainbow before the flood because there was no rain. So you didn't have that curtain of water coming down. There was a mist that came up, but you didn't have that curtain of water coming down that creates a rainbow. So God didn't have to change physics or the way light can be separated into colors. He just the rainbow came about because there was rain. The ark rested on the 17th day of the 7th month, the same day as Jesus' resurrection. Fun little thing. And Noah and company came out on the 27th day of the 2nd month, the same day as the ascension of Jesus. Do with that as you will. Now we have a strange story here at the end of chapter 8 with Ham and Noah. End of chapter 9, sorry. I'm not going to go over the details of the flood. You guys all know that, how he was in there, that sent out the birds. Yeah. So here's Noah. Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine, and he was drunk. And he became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. The word saw is an interesting, kind of crazy one, more active perhaps. And so it's not clear exactly what Ham did. But it is interesting that not only did Noah recognize that something had happened, he recognized who did it. So it's an interesting thing. Shem and Japheth were particularly respectful, taking a garment, walking backwards, draping it over their father. Their faces were turned. So Noah wakes up, realizes what's happened. However that happened, I don't know. But here's where it gets interesting. He doesn't say bad things about Ham. He says it about his son, Canaan. He doesn't curse Ham. He curses Canaan, Ham's son. Fascinating thing. Not clear why. Either it was prophetic or maybe Canaan, was carrying on the family traits already or something like that. We don't know why exactly, but he cursed Canaan.